Good morning, and thank you first of all, Wayne, very much for inviting me and to this fascinating and wonderful conference. If modern societies are understood as accelerating societies, and time is a theoretically strategic focal point for coupling social structure with self-understanding and identity of agents, then the design of time, marking time points such as the millennium, reconfiguring spaces and designs to stay with the times, inside and across the museum spectrum, I would say, is of theoretical as well as empirical interest. Looking back over the past 30 years, the digital revolution marks a crucial watershed in the history of museums, speeding up and complexifying their operations in comparison with the pre-digital era, when they did things differently. This speeding up, or question of velocity, is central to the discussion of museum temporalities, whether at the level of structures or at the level of agency, both professional and public. Digitalization has impacted collection management, documentation, administration, periodicity of conservation and storage, and also research. Digitalized collection records allow discoveries to be made, and websites facilitate comprehensive and accessible information and access at the click of a mouse. Social media allow people to interact with museums as part of their Facebook circle, and so on. The speeding up process is not, however, limited to digitalization of collection management. It has impacted architectural and design processes too. The connection between information systems and the broader renewal of the museum is evident in the case of Leiden. The reorganization of the National Museum of Ethnology coincided with the Delta Plan funding, whereby the NME became the first museum in the Netherlands to procure the museum system, TMS, a digital registration system, and I quote from Staal and de Rijk, who are the authors of the Inside Out publication, wherein the collection and the entire workflow can be documented and consulted. The museum system became, as they put it, indispensable for the working process of curators and designers, as well as crucial as an information provider for the modernized museum. Revaluation and renovation of old museum premises, as Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblet called the transvaluation of the outmoded long ago, or Karp and Kratz called the blockbuster reinstallation trend, which followed the straightforward blockbuster exhibits of the 1970s, objectifies our changing notions of temporality, more specific museum temporalities. This trend is exemplified by the Rijksmuseum's decade-long renewal, 2003 to 2013, the idea that we might go further with architect Kuipers, not back to Kuipers, but a picking up of and moving on with him. All of this intensified networked activity further instantiates the question of velocity. So my talk today concerns the specific role attributed to moving images or moving pictures in the renovation of ethnographic museums. Has the use of the moving image in ethnographic museums changed over the past 15 to 20 years? If so, how? What does the use of moving images have to do with temporalities, imagined or otherwise, of the ethnographic museum? And how does the notion of velocity, speed, enter the discussion? As in, how the ethnographic museum, its staff and public imagine moving images to act upon the ambulant spectator and actualize museum spaces. And how does renovation itself get customized through time? And how is agency exercised within and through structures, forms, masses, and technologies of exhibition, projection, as well as installation, enchanting or otherwise? To answer these kinds of questions would, of course, require historical research into the memories of museum staff and other agents, designers, curators in the process, which I should love to do but haven't yet done. The case, then, that I'm talking about concerns the 1996 to 2001 refurbishment of the National Museum of Ethnology, and they worked with a mission. The NME manages, studies, and presents cultural heritage from throughout the world with the aim of providing insight into how cultures differ, correspond, and globally interweave. In this way, the museum hopes to promote understanding and respect for other cultures and identities among as wide and diverse an audience as possible. From 1996 to 2001, OD25 architecture and opera designers were responsible for the redesign of the NME's permanent exhibition. The design brief was drawn up, explicitly refers to timelessness as a classic style. Distinct, timeless, not fashionable, comprehensible, yet surprising, dramatic, titillating to the senses, diverse, lasting. We attach great importance to each cultural area having its own atmosphere. It is remarkable that the design brief makes no reference to time or history, even though the designers, and I quote again, had to take account of a 165-year-old history of the museum. The design brief does, however, speak of velocity. It speaks of a fast lane that was to encompass the ribbon, seen as cross-cultural influence around the world. Renovating an existing building was a new departure, a kind of sustainability, a clever thriftiness. The project was given to Opera, who had previously done a number of temporary exhibitions at the NME. The project of turning the museum inside out was explicitly oriented towards the public and their experience of the museum, very much in tune with broader developments among museums at the time. Opera's design tied, as they put it, this ribbon around the world with a flexible floor plan. I just realised I didn't say a word about the Rijksmuseum, but perhaps I haven't got that far yet. Wait a minute. That belonged to the earlier part about blockbuster renovations, of course. All right. And that was just part of the contemporary art program of the Rijksmuseum, which involved making replicas of artist Kellinus's atlas figure, damaged atlas figure. This was Simon Starling, and smashing them systematically and having them renovated and reinstalled in the atelier of the Rijksmuseum. I also referred in the abstract to the new 20th century exhibits of the Rijksmuseum upstairs, where film is used in quite a parsimonious but particular way. Okay. Opera's design had tied this ribbon around the world with a flexible floor plan that purported to underline the distinctiveness and at the same time the connections between different regions of the world. This meant that while the same architectural elements were incorporated into each gallery, their settings should change to make way for the identities of specific cultural areas. The large glass cases, almost invisible, in which the majority of the collection would be displayed, were to be the museum's leitmotif of a continuous worldwide cultural story. Opera was in charge of the entire design, from interior to information facilities, from the website to the signposting system throughout the building. The methodology meant the design office occupying a central position between the client and the suppliers, and the client being prepared to outsource the actual initiative. The designer was seen as a jack of all trades, and again, this is Stahl and Rijk, a maestro rolled into one, while the museum staff were also nudged into a similar position. The designers drew a parallel with the novelist Georges Perec's Life, a User's Manual, to characterize the museum's efforts to tell an infinite number of stories under one roof. While the novel centers on a globetrotter, the designers and the museum sought a thread to bind the different sections together. Opera, we are told, designed a structure, not a simulated reality. And that was reflected in the end product. The finished galleries distinguished themselves from other ethnological museums by the complete absence of dioramas, Stahl and Reich say. Nowhere do you get the sense of a lifelike illusion. The objects are presented in a completely unadorned way, yet within the context of related objects, but never against a naturalistic backdrop. The wall was a central shackle in opera's three-speed conceptualization. Newly installed, 8 of them in each of the regional galleries. Indonesia was the first gallery to be completed. The 3 speeds that were brought in, the permanent collection, the temporary presentations of individual themes on that wall, and the design of short-term current affairs exhibitions behind the wall are particularly pertinent to questions of speed. Velocity was literally built into the design. The first drafts of the Indonesia gallery, which you see here projected, clearly show the intended modular structure, the 20-meter wall showing trading contacts, a map with navigational models, rows of transparent glass cabinets at right angles to the wall. As architect Bevers put it, we wanted to avoid showing objects on the wall. Instead, we worked with representations, projections, texts, and screens, almost like a mirror, reflecting the exhibits in the gallery. They can be read as installments and read in installments and symbolize the central idea of the ribbon around the world. Behind the walls lies the third layer, and this is the space for bringing the contemporary relevance of a culture into the picture. 3 speeds. The collection is the staple element, fixed for the coming 10 to 15 years, this was 2003, projected onto the face of the concrete wall. You will find a special feature of one culture in relation to the surrounding ones. These presentations can be altered, say, every year. Behind the wall, alterations can happen even quicker. Depending on current affairs, you can organize a new exhibition every month. The large walls seem thus to resemble something like second gear in opera's 3-speed approach. In the years that followed the reopening in 2001, the museum's self-evaluation brought to light a public wish for people to be brought into the exhibitions. Exactly how this wish came to be voiced, elicited, or picked up requires historical research. The outcome of this public desire was that in 2010, the key walls were given new accents, and this is still referred to as wallpapering, not seen as a program, but as a means to relay the atmosphere of a culture, what people do. Pictures and film give context, actually, as the head of exhibitions said to me earlier this year. Context is what Lisa Swaving identified with respect to the use of film in the Tropen Museum when she compares cases of its use in exhibitions today, Africa, Weaving, Caribbean Roots exhibitions. She compares them to that of the use of figures in the past. My question is really whether context in the Tropen Museum is the same thing as atmosphere in Leiden. When it comes to the use of projected images on the walls, there seem to be some important differences which have to do with the respective velocities of the exhibition components. So let's take a look at some of these. First of all, structure, mass, and form. The Leiden walls are a structural compositional element in the museum script. Their repetition through the museum's permanent galleries actually contributes to the rhythm of the building's interior spaces. The projections may be one picture or several or film fragments. The same recipe is used in each gallery. Special beamers, 6 for a 20-meter wall were installed and an edge plinth between the beamers so as not to cast a shadow when you stand up close. The rough surfaces of the walls lend texture to the moving pictures projected upon them, tactility to their velocity, you could say. Secondly, velocity. Loops of 5 to 10 minutes were made in consultation with small working groups who helped to calibrate the pace, that it should be neither too fast nor too slow. Relative velocity was certainly perceived as a crucial dimension of wallpapering. It was engineered with precision, not too fast and not too slow. It was clearly intended as background to the collection, wallpaper, but then with a crucial difference. Time-based wallpaper is more than context. While wallpaper is the euphemism, suggesting a wall covering that may be changed, the material speed of the moving pictures, their loops, their fades, their expansions, contractions, makes wallpapering seem too static a term for what is happening in the gallery spaces. Thirdly, scale. The scale of the walls and their projections also belies the notion of context, suggesting instead the atmospherics of a diorama that can be entered and experienced by the public. Recalling that the finished design of 2001, Leiden Renovation, was to distinguish itself from other ethnographic museums by a complete absence of dioramas, the reconfiguration of the walls into something that closely resembles a large diorama constitutes a striking historical departure from the design parameters 7 years before. Considering the agency exerted quite literally at this confluence with structure, introducing time-based moving pictures was to reconfigure the relational aesthetics of these spaces, their collections and their visitors. Fourthly, affordances. The long sides of the galleries opposite the walls are furnished, in some cases, with a large bench that invites the visitor to sit down, linger a while, and enjoy the collection against this ever-changing backdrop. The seat prompts one to sit, while the moving pictures encourage one to stay and soak up the atmosphere for 5 to 10 minutes, an echo perhaps of the cinema of exhibition. The visitor's speed through the galleries is therefore apprehended by this museological configuration, and slowing down means perhaps the chance of noticing more, looking further into the diorama, and other levels of narration. Perhaps for young people, perhaps a chance to consult their mobile devices, that kind of thing. The architectural speeds of the gallery are echoed in the relative speeds of the differently scaled system of moving images. So fifthly, system. The wall, with its generic time, is thus one quite central aspect of the three-speed system developed by opera. Other velocities and scales of moving picture are systematically incorporated into the regional galleries, thereby establishing a contrast with what might be termed the generic time of the large-scale looped projections on the walls. Sorry, I should have shown this before. Indonesia, so landscape and portraits. There are medium-sized screens used to project events in historical time, captured in documentary film, the expeditionary adventure genre. An example of this second speed is footage dating from the 1964 Telem expedition, projected in one corner of the Africa Gallery, next to a replica of architect Herman Hahn's cage, constructed to explore the cliff dwellings of the original inhabitants of the Dogon Cliffs in Mali. The reborn version of the object hangs in the museum next to a projection of a film fragment. The film excerpt shown in the gallery just shows the cage swinging. It certainly does not show the anthropometric measurements that were taken to compare the Dogon newcomers with the physical remains in the cliffs, which was shown on documentary film, and you can find it on YouTube. Historical events, historical time, events, dates, names, places, paced through the documentary film fragment that links it to a specific object on display, as part of an ensemble, adds a distinctive velocity to the gallery relative to that of the generic wall. A fragment that can be opened up and viewed in extenso on YouTube, thereby revealing a completely different story to the rather curious link made by using this time machine replica of Hans' cage. Leiden's Oceania, newly reinstalled on the first floor, uses the medium-sized screen projecting Maori project footage to similar, though much more recent historically, narrative intent, but also to draw the wandering public to the end of a very long corridor where they can find the entrance to the main gallery of Oceania. Here, the medium screen moving image functions as an affordance, magnetizing the stroller towards an entrance they might otherwise miss. The third speed is the small screen, with the detailed information presented in various forms, touch screens for individual objects on display, quizzes, film footage showing the making of, for example, a basket, an interview with a curator, or a small film showing the use of kulit wayang puppets in a showcase in Indonesia. The intention here is to allow the viewer to identify objects on display, to go into depth concerning a particular object, the making of, or to question their own assumptions, the interactive quiz, for instance, to show how something is used, and so on. The three speeds of the Leiden exhibitions, engineered through distinct uses of the moving image in predominantly darkened galleries, with systematic variation in the scale of projection, the use of the wall, medium and small screens respectively, duration, the length of the time loop, content and provenance of images, generic, landscape and portrait, historical event, connecting, particular information pertaining to a specific collection item, sound, from generic sounds of waves breaking on the shores, to voices explaining what happened, to particular musical traffic or other sounds, fill the air and help to confect what I call the inhabited room. The long tradition of inhabited rooms in European and American museums, where mannequins were often used to populate interior space, finds an echo in the way film is used in Leiden to people, I would say, rather than wallpaper, the walls. As mentioned earlier, Lisa Swaving's analysis of the use of film in the Tropen Museum makes a comparison with older uses of figures in exhibitions in terms of context. And while providing context seems to have been the main concern in the Tropen Museum, certainly for the weaving case that Lisa examines in the Africa department, the rather organic development of audiovisual use in Amsterdam contrasts sharply with Leiden's paradigm shift in the 1996-2001 renewal, and in the 2010 customizing of the ribbon around the world walls for the projection of generic, atmospheric, spatializing, and populating moving images. I have to stop there. Okay, I will.